So today I think we're going to help you unravel what looks to be pretty complicated, which is how to set up your raid composition, the boons we use, and why we use them. Now, while there isn't always an exactly right answer as to how you should run your composition, with a little bit of explaining, you'll see that there's a different composition that's ideal for each scenario, and it may start to make more sense why the commander arranges things the way he does, and why he requests specific classes. So the buffs that everyone is looking for typically is protection, regen, quickness, alacrity, fury, and 25 stacks of might. You also have some specific profession-specific buffs that are going to be shown below. Frost Spirit increases damage for all power class players. Sun Spirit gives condition damage to everyone when they attack, and then Spotter adds precision to all of everyone in your subgroup. Your warrior specific buffs are going to be two of them. There's going to be Banner of Discipline and Banner of Strength. These are going to increase your power, precision, condition damage, and ferocity for everyone. These are 10-man buffs, and you're always going to have a Banner Slave in every one of your fights, so always make sure that these things are covered. This is what your base boons should look like for every single raid encounter. Now, while it's certainly nice to have all of the boons in the game, as well as all of the available buffs that can power allies and assassins' presence, they're really not necessary and they're also not normal, so you shouldn't expect these in every raid. Stability is only needed for specific encounters, whenever you need to prevent a knockdown, so you won't have them all of the time. So now a word about subgroups. Why do we split ourselves up into subgroups? If you look at the way the squad is assembled, after you click the little arrow on up here, it'll open up an option. You can you can sort your group into different subgroups. You could leave everybody in the same; they'd all be in subgroup 1, all 10 people. But there's a reason why the commander splits people into groups like this. The reason why is that there's a lot of skills that are 10 man. For example, your druid spirits; those are 10 man and will apply to everyone. Your banner slave; the banners are also 10 man and will apply to everyone. However, other boons are not quite so forgiving. If you're looking at a lot of your skills that you activate, say for example these dragon hunters are running Feel My Wrath, that is a 5-man effect that it'll do. So if you are all in one big blob, one big 10-man squad, the buffs are not necessarily going to be applied evenly. Which could end up happening is that it's going to apply it to the players who are closest to you, and will end up overstacking the quickness or might or fury or whatever it is you're trying to apply to your allies is only going to be applied to the people that are closest to you. The problem is that since you have 10 people, if you have some people who are a little bit further away, they're not going to get the benefit, even if they are within range of your skill. Your skill could be 240 radius, but it won't actually affect them because they're not split up properly. So when the commander splits people into two subgroups, the reason for that is to make sure that everyone in that subgroup gets a good covering of boons. By splitting it up like this, for example, if this Chronomancer was to cast his quickness or his healing wells or whatever it is he wants to do, the Scourge puts down his healing, all of that is going to be applied to the people inside of his subgroup. The passive effect from the Scourge is going to be giving lifesteal. It's going to apply to everyone inside of his subgroup, etc., etc. Your Druid is going to apply a Spotter. It's going to be a 5-target effect. It's going to give it to everyone in his subgroup. You get the idea. When you're splitting up your subgroups like this is what's important, making sure that you have adequate coverage. If you have a quickness in one group and not in the other, you want to try to split the two quickness providers up to make sure that both groups have an adequate coverage of quickness. That is the reason why you split up your subgroups. That is why you will see commanders do this, and I would recommend you do so whenever you start commanding. So now the rationale for why we pick a specific composition. If you look at this composition, this is pretty close to what I consider to be an ideal composition, not because it's the fastest and the highest DPS, but because it's one of the safest. Whenever you're bringing into one of these fights, I like to have the off healer be a heal necro. Now, heal necro doesn't have to be full healer like ours was in this particular fight. You can actually run a Plague Doctor's version, full marshals. Even if you look at the one on Snow Crows, it's going to be a mix of shamans and marshals to get additional condi damage. So your Plague Doctors can actually, you don't need that much healing power, and one of the main reasons why is because the main source of healing that comes from your Scourge is actually from his barriers, which have a pretty forgiving modifier. Even a full condition damage Scourge, when he puts down his 10-man barrier, is still going to barrier for up to 2,000 with no healing power. So add on to that, any additional healing power you have, even 700 or 800 healing power is a lot of times enough to where you can most of the time just come in with one solo healer as your Druid, but then the Scourge with his barriers and his lifesteal for his subgroup is going to be enough to maintain that. So but that aside, if you look at the composition that we have here, the Chronomancers are going a bit more aggressive, so they're doing a little bit more DPS, and as you can see, they're actually pretty even with the other DPS players in the rest of the raid group. The total damage that you were doing per second to the target is what you're concerned with. So it's a 91,442 damage per second, which is pretty good. For most of the bosses, you want to try to maintain about 100,000 DPS per second, so you can actually kill the boss. You can look at the total time that it took us and the total amount of health that you have to do. And whenever you're doing your ideal composition, you want to try to make sure you have enough DPS. You could technically go into any boss with a bunch of healers and nobody would ever die, but you're not going to whittle this down in time, and you're going to hit the timer for the enrage. But now as to why this specific composition. Most classic ones you're going to look at is typically used to use a Signet of Inspiration Chronomancer, and two Chronomancers is enough to maintain Alacrity and Quickness. Alacrity and Quickness is super important to every raid group. You would just consider it to be a critical buff. Now, since the meta is shifting away and the Chronomancers are more DPS type players, as you can see from their damage, these guys are still maintaining Quickness. The way you see that is if you go over to your buffs and you pop over to your generation for the group, you're going to see that they actually are maintaining this 45.8 and 42.69 with a 2% wasted. Now, you don't want to judge them and say, oh, they don't have 100% quickness, because this is actually being judged by the group. If you're looking at the generation for the squad, they actually are covering almost perfect quickness uptime. So if you click on the generation group, the ideal number you want to see for your subgroup is going to be 50%. If you see that, you are maintaining permanent quickness for your group, and I'll show that in a second. So the boons that you really want covered for almost every single time is you want 25 stacks of might for everyone, you want permanent fury for everyone in the group, you want your quickness, you want your alacrity, and then you want to maintain your protection and your regen. Now the protection and regen are typically passive buffs that are going to be done by the druid spirits, so you don't have to worry about them too much. The other boons are just nice to have, but are really not necessities. So you're going to see how these boons play out whenever you're doing that. Make sure you have all these covered. So you always want to have your banner slave, so you have your banners. It's not obviously you can do without a banner slave if you want to, but you're losing 100 power and 100 precision, 100 condition damage on everyone in your party. So just keep that in mind if you go without a banner slave. Banner slaves also have a lot of CCs, so you want to keep that in mind. So when you're looking at these, the way the fights actually play out, what you want to pay attention to is how many of the buffs are actually on the players themselves, and you want to make sure that they are all well stacked. So as you can see, everyone comes in there, the fight actually starts, and you're going to see everyone's health is going to take a drop, which is the main reason why you take your heal necro. You'll get to see this thing in action. As soon as the green goes off, everyone's health is going to take a hit, usually about 80% of their hit points. Without barrier, and if you don't see the barrier get applied, see everyone's health got chunked down there? This can be very difficult to recover from. The druid usually has to spike heal, and it's a pretty tough thing, especially if the seekers are really close by. So what you want to make sure when you're looking at your buffs, you want to make sure that everyone has 25 stacks of might, fury, quickness, alacrity, protection, and regen. Every other buff that you have is a nice to have, but it is not necessary. That is what you're covering. And then you also want to make sure that everyone has their banners. If you're looking at the subgroup that actually has the heal necro, they also are going to have the additional benefit of having the vampiric effect is going to be playing out on them. Vampiric is underestimated. It really is underestimated. That lifesteal is incredibly powerful, so it's usually more than enough to heal up your group. So when you're looking at your composition, try to make sure that you have those key things covered. Having an extra healer is usually not going to kill you, but as long as you make sure that you have all of your key things covered. So 25 stacks of might, fury, alacrity, and regen. And now we'll go over which classes can provide all of these things so you can try to play with your composition to fit your needs. So why Druid? Well, Druid actually covers a lot of the different buffs. If you notice that one of the things we pointed out we were always going to have as far as your buffs were concerned were your Sun Spirit, your Frost Spirit, you also always want protection, and then you would like to have regen as much as possible. Well, the Druid also happens to provide not only all of these things, but it also hits two other boxes that we were trying to check off. We have our Fury, which is from Call of the Wild, and then we also have our Might. So the Druid is one of the only classes that can stack 25 stacks of Might on all 10 party members or everyone in the squad, and it's due to this trait, Grace of the Land. Grace of the Land, if you notice, it gives you 2 stacks of might per pulse on every one of your Celestial Avatar abilities, and as long as everyone is stacked tight and you use your Celestial Avatar skills wisely, you can stack 25 stacks of might and maintain it. So you're going to try to maintain as many of those buffs as possible, and you can cover most of them with your Druid. So when you go ahead and cast off your spirits, and when you enter Celestial Avatar form, you can rapidly stack up your 25 stacks of might and then maintain the 25 stacks of might as much as you can. So the Druid is one of the core classes that will always be included in every composition, and it's for this ability, the ability to stack might on your party, maintain this might, maintain the fury, maintain the regen, and also maintain the positive buffs that you're giving. You're also giving permanent protection, and you're going to be giving damage buffs through your Frost Spirit and your Sun Spirit. The trait that's going to be giving the protection, if you notice, it's Nature's Vengeance. So protection is going to pulse with a 5 1/4 seconds for all 10 targets, which will maintain all of those buffs on your party. So the Druid is a key part of your buffs. It also provides another nice to have spotter, which is going to be very useful for any of your power DPS characters. Definitely going to want to have that in your party, and the Druid is going to be one of the core classes for every raid composition. So now we can start assembling our composition. We know we need our Druid, we know we need our Banner Slave, so by having those things covered, we know those are the key parts for any composition. We'll start filling in the rest of them later, but just having these two, we're going to have some of the main buffs that we need. You can actually see here we have our Warrior specific buffs, Banner Slave, and we also have our Ranger specific buffs, as well as our Might and our Fury. So now you can start assembling the rest of the buffs that you need for your party, which are going to be essential. The main ones is going to be Alacrity. Alacrity can be provided either by a single Alacrity, who is going to be usually running Diviners. You can also have a Condi version of that, which works just as well. Or you can also have it be provided by two individuals. Both of them can be Condi Renegades or Power Renegades, which are running Righteous Rebel. Righteous Rebel together, even though they don't have boon duration, allows them to maintain Alacrity as long as there's two of them. And it's a 5 target increase, makes it 10 targets. Once you have your Alacrity covered, you can also use, for your quickness, you can either use a Condi Quick Brand, which is shown on Snow Crows, one on each subgroup. You can also have it done with Chronomancers. You could use a Condi Boon Chrono, which is also shown on Snow Crows, which is a pretty good damage for some bosses. You can use a Power Boon Chrono, one on each subgroup, also shown on Snow Crows, and they're usually higher damage composition. Or you can use one of each. You can use a Chrono, you can use a Quick Brand in the other subgroup, whatever makes you happy. Okay, so now we're going to be going over what we mean when it's to tanking, when it comes to the way the boons and the way that the range indicators work, when it comes to looking at your raid composition. So here in this fight, we're doing a typical one. It's Veiled Guardian. It's usually pretty beginner friendly. It does have some interesting mechanics, but we're going to have a pretty close to what's an ideal composition for this fight. We have our healer, our off healer is a heal necro, which is going to be helping us for the greens. We have two chronomancers that are providing quickness, but neither of them is tanking, and I'll explain why in just a second, why a different tank would be preferred. In this case, our tank is going to be the Alacrity, and then we have everyone else is going raw DPS. The reason why you don't always want to have those chronomancers make excellent tanks. They do. But the reason recently, whenever they did one of the updates, the Snow Crows meta shifted. So if you look at what the Boon Chronos recommended for Snow Crows now, it's actually showing you a Seize the Moment as the primary source of quickness. And if you're looking at Seize the Moment's area of effect, it's 240 radius. So if you highlight one of your Chronomancers for reference, pop up your 240 indicator, this green circle that pops up around is giving you a rough estimate of 240. If you're in game, whenever you activate and shatter your clones, you're going to see a white circle around your character model that's also going to represent the same range. This is important. Whenever you're looking at where people are stacking, based on where the tank's position is versus where the boss is going to be standing and where all the people are going to be standing DPSing the boss, sometimes Seize the Moment doesn't quite cover them depending on the size of the boss. In this case, it's not so bad, but in the thicker boss like Gorsevol, or you're dealing with something like that, you're not going to be within range or Seize the Moment. So 240 range is where you're going to struggle. If you look at all of your Chronomancer wells, they also have a 240 radius, which means that if you're casting them, you want to put them on your group and not on yourself, so you won't get their benefits if you want to maintain boons on the group. On the other hand, if you're looking at what your Alacrity was tanking, typically Orders from Above does have a 240 radius, but when you trade it for Righteous Rebel, you're going to increase that by another 120, putting it up to 360 radius. This green circle, if you turn both of them on, you can obviously see a massive difference. You can also move with you. So as you're moving, it'll always activate. So your Alacrity actually makes a pretty ideal tank when it comes to Alacrity and performing its function. The Alacrity can also be a pretty effective healer. It's not always the best. Personally, I prefer to have a more DPS type Alacrity be the tank with the Knight's gear, which I'll show you in a second. However, this is the composition that we had right now. So now if you're watching this replay, you hit your play, you can actually leave the indicators up. You'll see how the tank approaches, comes in, and everyone is still within range of your radius. The 240 circle, you might see some people pop out of the 240, and happens when the tank moves up against the wall and dodges backwards. This 240 radius is one of the prime reasons why you don't always want the Chronomancer to be the tanking. If the Chronomancer is tanking, sees the moment quickness does not apply to everyone else who is outside of that 240 radius. They're not going to get the quickness. So while a Chronomancer makes a very effective tank, it's usually better for the Alacrity, because if you notice, everyone is always inside this radius. It's a very forgiving radius. It's much better for tanking purposes.